Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating topic, the paradox of leaving, exit models, and intentional communities. Now, it might feel completely counterintuitive, but here is the core paradox of intentional living. These regenerative and land-based communities usually don't fail because they have a bad overarching vision or poor ecological practices. No, they fail because of messy departures. So what actually happens when someone decides to pack their bags and leave? It's a completely fundamental question. When you're living in a shared space, the way a group handles a departure ultimately dictates the financial survival and really the social fabric of the remaining community. Honestly, it's the ultimate stress test for any collective. Okay, let's look at our roadmap for today. First, we'll hit the community exit paradox. Then we'll compare market versus limited equity, explore group equity and co-housing, take a quick detour into digital exits, look at RCOs and how to program an exit, and finally, wrap up with protecting the community. All right, Section 1, the community exit paradox, and exactly why departures matter so much. When we join a land-based project or an eco-village, we usually have this romanticized vision of a forever community. But let's be real, human transitions are just inevitable. Lives change, right? And we absolutely have to plan for that reality. There is a deeply powerful insight here. Designing a community that members are permitted to leave is a structural mechanism that actively reinforces the commitment of those who choose to stay. I know it sounds totally backwards, but the absolute best way to keep a community together is actually to make it easy, clear, and safe for people to leave. By structuring a clear exit path, you're actively reinforcing the trust of everyone who decides to stay. Moving right along to Section 2, market versus limited equity, focusing on those financial exit models. Let's kick things off with our first category. In a market equity cooperative, members buy a share that corresponds to a specific unit, and when they leave, they are completely free to sell that share on the open market at whatever the prevailing rate is. Think of it like simply selling a traditional house to the highest bidder. And this brilliantly illustrates the inherent tension we're dealing with here. On the pro side, market equity maximizes individual wealth generation. Who doesn't love that? But the con? It exposes the entire community to speculative market forces and gentrification. Selling at market value might be great for the departing individual's wallet, but it can be absolutely devastating for the remaining community's affordability. To counter that, we have limited equity cooperatives, or LECs. This model explicitly restricts the resale value of shares to strike a balance between personal wealth building and permanent housing affordability. So instead of the Wild West of the open market dictating the price, the exit payout relies on a restricted, pre-agreed formula. This ensures prices just don't skyrocket out of control. Now, looking at this through the lens of the remaining community, the pros are massive. It basically guarantees housing affordability across generations. The trade-off, of course, is a restricted return on equity for the exiting individual. LECs act as a shield, protecting the collective group from huge market surges, even if it means capping the individual's profit when they leave. To ground these financial concepts in reality, we can look at some fantastic real-world implementations. San Francisco, for instance, has a rich history of legacy housing cooperatives that use this exact limited equity model to insulate their properties from intense speculation. And the Boulder Housing Coalition in Colorado is another stellar example of using limited equity to ensure long-term, highly accessible cooperative living. Which brings us to Section 3, group equity and co-housing. Let's look at collective asset control. So how does this build into models where the collective retains even more control? That brings us to the group equity cooperative. Here, the corporation itself retains 100% of the property equity. When a member departs, they literally only receive their initial nominal deposit back. It's essentially just like getting a standard rental deposit back from a landlord. So that means zero personal wealth accumulation, but absolute maximum stability for the group. The trade-offs here are incredibly clear-cut. The absolute biggest pro is the extremely low entry and exit barriers, making this model highly, highly accessible. The con, naturally, is that members build absolutely no personal wealth from the property appreciating. But here's the catch. While individuals don't get rich, the cooperative itself builds a massive economy of scale over time. We also see some really cool practical variations in co-housing and mutual aid spaces. Look at Lilac over in Leeds, England, which uses a mutual home ownership model. Or the Elon model, which actively moves members from paying rent into equity accounts. A lot of these communities also use a right of first refusal. That means departing members must offer their unit back to the community first, which is a brilliant way to protect the social fabric. All right, Section 4, Digital Exits. We're talking RageQuits and E2C. I want to pivot briefly to the digital world because the exact same human paradoxes apply there. In decentralized organizations, there's a mechanism called the Moloch RageQuit. It's a smart contract feature that allows members to literally burn their voting shares and withdraw their proportional funds if they heavily disagree with a collective decision. It beautifully protects minority voices from hostile takeovers. However, mass exits can severely drain the remaining community's treasury overnight, so it's a double-edged sword. Now, what's really interesting here is an alternative to the traditional corporate exit known as exit to community, or E2C. Instead of startups just selling out to Wall Street or going through a massive corporate acquisition, E2C models allow businesses to transition ownership back to their communities. It's a fantastic way to keep the wealth with the very people who actually value it and helped generate it in the first place. Moving to Section 5, RCOS and programming the exit. So, how do communities actually formalize these incredibly messy human transitions before disaster strikes? Well, they use the Regenerative Community Operating System, or RCOS. The absolute most powerful rule in RCOS is its meta-invariant. If it is not written and adopted, it does not exist. When it comes to leaving a community, unwritten, informal exit pathways leave groups entirely vulnerable to capture and, frankly, collapse. The explicit must always beat the implicit. To handle this, RCOS defines explicit Layer 1 membership states. You have applicant, trial member, full member, and, crucially, exited member. Notice that exited member is a mandatory final state. It's specifically designed to cleanly sever all trailing liabilities and obligations, making sure a former member can't exert any weird retroactive influence from afar. And finally, Section 6, protecting the community and guarding those who stay behind. Let's synthesize this whole explainer by focusing on some highly actionable guidelines to actively shield the remaining community. The absolutely crucial takeaway is following these 3 vital steps. Number 1, draft the exit protocol first, way before any conflict arises. Number 2, stagger your financial outflows using tools like promissory notes so the Treasury doesn't just go bankrupt overnight if someone leaves. And number 3, separate a departing member's political voice from their economic equity immediately. Which leaves us with one final and honestly pretty provocative question. How will your community design its systems for human scale and those totally inevitable transitions? Knowing that human lives are dynamic, planning a safe, highly structured exit isn't a sign of failure at all. In fact, it's the very foundation of a truly resilient and regenerative community.